due to the House of Opportunities Commission's Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee meeting on February 28th. Sorry for a little late pause in the meeting start time, a little technical difficulty, which we've overcome. So thank everyone who's joining us on Zoom, and also thank staff that are present today. I want to acknowledge beside me is also a member and a commissioner, Jeffrey Merkowitz, member of the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee. And I also just want to acknowledge the presence of two of our new commissioners who are present with us today in this committee meeting, Jonathan Miller, who's president, and also Paul Weiss. And so thank them for attending the meeting. So we will proceed with the order of agenda. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of December the 20th, 2024. Can I get a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Seconded. Probably moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, carried. Motion carries. We'll now proceed. This is our day of a lot of budget presentations. And so we'll proceed with the first item, which is the fiscal year 2025 second quarter unaudited financial statements. They'll be presented to us, and I'll turn to our president, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the public, and the HLC team. Commissioners, as you know, we present unaudited financial statements on a quarterly basis. The materials have been provided. What you will see reflected is what we've talked about for quite some time in terms of our agency's steps towards improving performance of our properties, going through lease enforcement, but ultimately also accounting for shifts in regards to our development timelines. As our CFO will share, the position of the agency is stable. Our financial position is strong. And I will turn it over to our CFO, Tim Getzinger, for some introductory remarks before he turns it over to Eugenia Pasquale, our controller.
Thank you, President Andrews. Commissioners, for the record, my name is Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. And before we get into the first packet item, these are a few of the macro items in terms of the agency. Today, the finance team will be presenting on 4 items, including unaudited financials, budget to actuals, write-offs, and a request to extend a contract. In terms of the agency's FY25 Q2 financial position, HOC's financial health remains stable. Total assets increased by $41.5 million to $2.23 billion, the highest in agency history. Net position decreased by $7.4 million from the start of the fiscal year, mainly driven by operating items, primarily the timing of commitment and development fees and property performance, which will be further discussed in the presentation of the budget to actuals. After adjusting the net loss for the unrealized gains and losses on investment, HOC ended the second quarter with an adjusted net loss of $6.7 million compared to an adjusted net loss of $3.5 million for the same period last fiscal year. Current and quick ratios are slightly down from the beginning of the fiscal year, but remain healthy at 2.95 and 2.45 respectively. Capitalization is stable, but slightly down at
Tim, could you just remind me what are our benchmarks for those?
Benchmarks, you're looking at least 2 to 1. Anything over that, and you're very stable.
Okay.
Capitalization is stable but slightly down at 96%. Tenant arrearages continue to be an issue, amounting to $946,000 for the quarter, though they are down from $1.7 million last quarter, which is indicative of the environment of lease enforcement that we are in. Reserves, including the general fund operating and property reserves, are stable. A review of the 9 revolving development funds also demonstrates stability and are projected to improve with upcoming commitment and development fees. The FY25 budget assumes $20 million in these fees. As indicated in the budget to actuals, although there is slippage in commitment and development fees, this is normal, and the timing and the amount of fees are subject to change in the financial market and project cost, which create both timing and dollar variances during the year. Post-COVID renormalization of operations is underway. However, as the Commission is aware, this is a long process as the court system continues to be a hurdle in repossessing and repositioning our inventory. Of the 3.7 million in property budget variance, the 9 properties with the highest variances represent 99% of the total variance. Note that last quarter, we talked about 12 properties representing 97% of the variance, so we are narrowing it down. When mapped with the tenant receivable balances, a key indicator of whether a tenant in a property is paying, the results continue to indicate that scattered sites, Cider Mill, and the 2 Glenmonts are driving major variances, which is why the agency continues to focus its efforts on these properties. That said, there are several positive signs. Number one, the reduction of maintenance costs is now over the last 2 quarters. Utility costs were slightly up, but continue to be lower than any quarter from the last fiscal year. Quarter over quarter property budget variance is at a 7-quarter low. We are reporting an increase of quarterly variance of 1.49 million, but this is the lowest quarterly increase since FY23 Q3, and those figures would have been skewed. The budget variance would have been much higher back then, but we were putting in a lot of that emergency rental assistance, which had we not had that, that budget variance would have been much higher. So what I'm trying to say is, although we clearly do not want to see these budget variances, it's getting smaller, it's getting closer to what budget is. And really, had we not had those one-time emergency assistance, programs, it would have been much higher back in the day. Also, I want to note the very noteworthy turnaround at the RAD properties, and we've spoke about this before, which from FY22 to FY24 posted a negative $2.3 million budget variance. The properties are now posting a positive budget variance of $234,000. All of this lends faith that the efforts that we have done are all lending some positive results. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we can move to the first packet item.
Yes. I mean, it's great to see the progress that is being made. Obviously we all wish it were quicker, but understand that, courts are slowing us down and, there's appropriate protections in place. But, and we may have discussed this, so just remind me of our strategy. We've made great progress on a few properties. Is our strategy to focus on individual properties at a time as opposed to across all of them, or what? Why are we seeing more progress with some as opposed to with others?
Right. So across our portfolio, various properties are at different stages in terms of lease enforcement. Where we have the biggest variance that impacts our overall bottom line is where we have provided detailed information to the commission, along with expectation on when those lease enforcement activities would stabilize. There are some properties where there were hundreds of lease enforcement activities that were needed, but lease enforcement is happening across our entire portfolio. It's just that there are certain properties where that amount is pretty significant and impacts our bottom line, and that's why we've been focusing here. We provide guidance to each of our third-party property managers as well as our current managers as it pertains to the level and the steps in which they need to begin lease enforcement. And that's consistent across the portfolio.
So it's just a matter of proportion.
Absolutely. And so with a cider mill where there were hundreds and hundreds, we had to come up with a strategy. The property manager and or representative has to be at court. And then in terms of how many notices one can issue at any time, there was a strategy to focus on the highest offenders first and then move our way down. So there was a comprehensive plan for those properties that had the highest amount of lease enforcement activities that were needed.
I mean, I think the fact that cider mill and scattered sites have been perpetually associated with the problem of having deficiencies. So it's not unusual that we are still in that category. I don't know that we'll make a difference in there, but I'm not sure because of the scale of what we're dealing with there that we're ever going to totally get it fully resolved. Maybe I'm wrong.
Looking up at cider mill. In fact, we're I want to say, what was the latest in terms of occupancy? We're very close to 90% occupancy, which of course, going through lease enforcement at the same time, has been a challenge in the
That's
past.
physical occupancy, right?
That's physical occupancy, but also the economic occupancy is looking favorable. And as you can imagine, there was a period of time in which we had a hard time even leasing units because of the criminal activity there. That has no longer been an issue. We've been able to stabilize the property in a very positive way, and the trajectories are looking good. And so we do believe that Cider Mill will be a stabilized property. As you all also know, we are seeking support from the county and continue to seek support from the county as it pertains to the increased costs that we've had, along with the efforts to stabilize the security there. And so it's not just the rental income. Quite frankly, Cider Mill has been challenged by expenses that we've had to incur related to gang violence and other security issues at the property that have since subsided.
Is, it is one of our better known properties.
Better for worse.
It's our own opportunity zone.
It is, it's truly, truly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You can go ahead and proceed.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Tim.
Presenting this first item is Eugenia Pastel, our controller.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, Commissioners, President Andrews, HOC staff, and the viewing public. For the record, my name is Eugenia Pascal, Controller. Please turn to page 9, please. Combined statements of net position. As of the quarter ended December 31, 2024, the Commission's total assets, including the deferred outflows, amounted to 2.23 billion, an increase of 45 million, or about 2% of the 2.1 billion balance as of the fiscal year ending June 30, 2024. Excluding the deferred outflows of resources, the increase in total assets will be 41.5 million. This increase is mainly due to the acquisition of Battery Park, which added 55 million to the total capital assets, with a corresponding increase in total liabilities. The total liabilities increased from 1.83 billion in June to 1.88 billion in December, for an increase of 54 million. This is mainly due to the increase in total liabilities from the Battery Park transaction and the additional relock draws for properties under different phases of development. This is partially offset by a decrease in the single-family and multifamily bonds payable due to scheduled bond redemptions and principal amortization. Excuse me. The Commission's net position closed at 288 million, about 2.5% or 7 million lower than the 296 million posted in June, mainly due to the 6-month period net operating loss, as will be explained later. The liquidity ratios were slightly lower compared with the June indices, largely due to a decrease in restricted cash, decrease in restricted and unrestricted cash, cash equivalents, and investments, coupled with an increase in current maturing bond principal payments. The current ratio was 2.95 in December and 3.46 in June, whereas the quick ratio was 2.45 in December and 2.98 in June. Both ratios are still within the healthy range. The major contributors to the 45 million increase in total assets include an increase in the fixed assets due to Battery Park acquisition and construction and capital costs at the HOC headquarters, the Metropolitan, Garnkirk Farms, Emery Grove, and various scattered site units, partly offset by the normal depreciation of assets. An increase in mortgage and construction loans receivable due to advances from RELOC for West Side Shady Grove Building B, Willow Manor, Wheaton Gateway, and also advances from FHA Risk Sharing Reserve for Elizabeth House 3, the Housing Production Fund for Hillendale. This is partially offset by the principal amortization within the single-family fund, multifamily fund, and general fund. An increase in prepaid expenses, tenant rent, and rent subsidies receivables, partially offset by decrease in HUD and county grant receivables. The decrease in both the restricted and unrestricted cash and cash equivalents is mainly driven by the bond redemptions to pay the bondholders, which are scheduled the 1st of January and July. Additional draws from the HOC headquarters bond proceeds to pay for construction costs, annual payment of liability and property insurance, renewal of software licenses and maintenance support fees, and solid waste tax. The FY24 and FY25 wage adjustments and retirement contribution to employee retirement system unfunded actuarial liability. The FHA risk share advances to repay the PNC construction loan for Elizabeth House 3, timing of advances to several component units. This is partly offset by the payment from Hillendale for commitment fees and development fees and reimbursements from the state grant for the Metropolitan Green Roof Project. Do you have any questions as far as the balance sheet items? Thank you. Page 10, please. Combined statement of revenues and expenses. The commission has a total net loss of 7.4 million for the 6 months of fiscal year 25, compared with a net loss of 2.6 million for the same period of fiscal year 24, excluding the unrealized loss and investments of 0.7 million in FY25 and unrealized gain on investments of 0.9 million in FY24. HOC ended with an adjusted net loss of 6.7 million in FY25 as compared with a net loss of 3.5 million in FY24. Excuse me. This is mainly due to an increase in administrative expenses and fringe benefits driven by the general wage increase, housing assistance payments under the HCV program, and interest expense within the multifamily fund. The increase in expenses is partially offset by an increase in HAP revenues, multifamily fund investment income, and state and county grants. There was a gap between the HAP revenue and HAP expense during the period due to the timing of the release of additional funds we have requested from the HUD held reserve. Our request for HHR funding is currently being reviewed by HUD, and we are expecting to receive the funds as soon as the review is completed. The total operating revenues increased by 4.3 million from 154.6 million in fiscal year 25 to 158.9 million in FY25. Largely driven by an increase in HAP revenue, investment income, and state and county grants. Excluding the HAP revenue and unrealized gains and losses on investments, the commission ended with an adjusted operating revenue of 87.4 million in FY25 and 84.4 million in FY24, for an increase of 3.2 million. The operating expenses also increased from 160 million in FY24 to 171.6 million in FY25. Excuse me, up by 11.7 million, due primarily to an increase in HAP expenses, administration, fringe benefits, and interest expense. If we exclude the HAP expense, the increase in adjusted operating expenses is 6.8 million, from 88.8 million to 95.6 million. Excuse me. The non-operating net revenues amounted to 5.4 million in FY 25, up by 2.6 million from 2.7 million in FY 24. An increase in investment income, interest income on mortgage and construction loans receivable and other grants, partially offset by an increase in interest expense, accounted for the non-operating revenues favorable variance. A more detailed information is provided in the notes to financial statements on pages 13 to 18. This concludes the financial statements presentation. Thank you.
Could you speak for a minute about the HUD held reserves where we made a request for them to be drawn down? Was this all because of the actions that were taken by the administration to hold funding?
No, in the past, we used to get the disbursements in gross amount, and we keep whatever is excess in our accounts. However, they changed the cash management system a few years ago. So now HUD is holding it for us. And if we need money, we are just requesting for it.
Okay.
And we haven't seen any irregularities in terms of that program or the timing of reimbursements. This timing issue it occurs from time to time.
Yeah, because I know that there were, when the decision was made about holding funding, that there was so much demand on drawdowns, they really almost literally crashed the system. So some authorities could not even get access, much less get denied. So I'm glad that didn't happen in this case.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question, and just you know, I know it is a timing issue, but obviously we want to keep those reserve funds high. I know. So on the cap utilization, I guess I don't know, are we able to talk about like, you know, sort of what we're doing to get those numbers back up? I mean, we're still above 95%. We're almost at 96, but we've been kind of dropping a bit over the last year. No.
Yes, I could speak to that. As I shared, we have received additional vouchers for being a high performer. Sometimes we're even surprised to learn that there was an award of additional vouchers. And in fact, we recently received a notice that they needed to reconcile our percentage of vouchers.
But it also looks like our net utilization.
Yes, and so that's one factor. The other is the call-ups have been, and you will note in our quarterly reports, how many call-ups that we are doing. We are definitely working hard to ensure that the utilization gets back to the higher numbers. Lynn's not here this morning, but I can just share as a whole, her division has definitely been focused in on increasing our utilization.
Thank you. This is so that any question you have further about this matter?
No.
Because I think that this is just a presentation you all make to the finance committee. We don't do anything about referring this further. We're going to vote on this. It's just information. So thank you all very much. So we'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is the fiscal year 25 second quarter budget to actual statements.
Thank you. Commissioners, as you can see, we are getting closer and closer to beginning to turn the curve here, but there still are variances in terms of what we projected for our properties and how they're performing, as well as the timing of development and commitment fees. I will turn it over to our budget officer, Terry Fowler, to provide you with more details.
Good morning, Commissioners, President Andrews, staff, and the viewing public. For the record, I'm Terry Fowler, the Budget Officer, and I will present the second quarter budget to actuals. If we can go to page 1 of the packet. The agency ended the quarter with a negative variance of approximately 5.2 million based on a net cash flow shortfall of 5.7 million compared to the projected shortfall at this time of approximately 481,000. The primary causes for this were lower unrestricted cash flow in our properties, as has been discussed, based on primarily police enforcement efforts that are occurring. In addition, we have lower income in the general fund due to the timing of the receipt of projected commitment and development fees that has been offset partially by the expense savings experienced in the general fund. If we can
You
go
move to
page 11 of
attachment
the
A.
packet.
Okay, can you move to
Could we
attachment
go to
A?
page 11 of the packet? Thank you. At the top, you will see the general fund, and our general fund consists of basic overhead costs for the agency. As you may be aware that a general fund is typically going to operate at a deficit. The costs in your overhead are covered primarily from fees from allocating overhead. In addition to that, we offset that cost by the unrestricted cash in our property and various fees on our transactions, including loan management, commitment, and development fees. This fund ended the quarter with a deficit of approximately $5.6 million, which resulted in a negative variance of approximately 2.5 million when compared to the projected deficit for the second quarter of just over $3 million. As of December 31st, income in the general fund was $4.9 million lower than budget, and expenses were $2.3 million lower than budget. The negative income variance was primarily the result of the delays in the receipt of planned commitment and development fees of approximately $5.1 million. Had those fees been received, we would have a positive income variance at that time. The packet did detail the anticipated timing of the receipt of these fees. The majority of them are still planned to be received in this year. We do have one project that was planned that will move in next year and has been incorporated into the FY26 budget that is being developed. The reduction in the fees received thus far has been partially offset by the receipt of a $150,000 commitment fee that was received in the first quarter on the Nonprofit Preservation Fund and a $1.2 million commitment fee recognized in the second quarter related to the scattered site permanent financing. There was also a distribution of surplus cash on one of our tax credit properties. In addition, there were lower draws in the Opportunity Housing Fund related to the personnel and pre-development costs funded from that to the general fund. On our expense side in the general fund, we do have the expense positive variance, which is the result of lapse in salary and benefits, coupled with savings in various miscellaneous contracts, computer software, and savings in capital projects that are funded by draws from operations that have not occurred thus far this year. Moving to the bond funds, the administrative costs of the bond funds we are reporting here are funded by draws from the respective multifamily and single-family bond fund. They both are experiencing positive variances through the second quarter of $211,000 and $133,000, primarily as a result of salary and benefit lapse, coupled with savings in publications, registration fees, and professional services. If we can move to page 12 of the packet, the top section. Thank you. This chart is broken out into two pieces. The top section is our unrestricted development corporation properties, and the bottom is our restricted development corporation properties. The unrestricted portfolio ended the quarter with a cash flow of negative approximately $732,000 or 2.6 million less than projected. As mentioned previously, this variance is often largely attributable to items such as lower tenant income due to the higher vacancy loss at the properties, coupled with higher bad debt as we move through lease enforcement. And we do have a few properties that had higher maintenance and utility costs. The bottom section of the report are our restricted properties. This group of properties, the cash flow was 305,000, actually better than the shortfall projected. And this is largely attributable to the RAD 6. We reported in the first quarter that the RAD 6 was within $6,000 of budget. This quarter, they actually are producing a positive variance to budget of approximately $234,000. And a lot of that is attributable to the improvements that we've had through lease enforcement and operations at the property. If we move on to page 13 of the packet, again, this chart is broken into unrestricted and restricted properties. This chart includes the large scattered site portfolio that we have discussed previously that is going through a major lease enforcement efforts in our scattered sites. For the top group of the unrestricted properties, the properties ended with a cash flow of $822,000, which is 2.25 million less than projected. The bottom portion of the chart are those properties that have restricted cash flow. And for this group, cash flow was 1.1 million less than budget. This does include the previously mentioned cider mill property, which is the majority of the variance. However, that variance, although growing, is not growing at the pace we saw in the first quarter as we are making improvements at the property. Do you have any questions related to opportunity housing before I move on to the public fund on page 14? Okay, if we can move to page 14 of the packet. In our public fund, the Housing Choice Voucher Program ended the quarter with a shortfall of just over $2 million. This was comprised of housing assistance payments that exceeded HAP revenue of $2.5 million, countered by an administrative surplus of approximately $444,000. As explained previously, we do make requests for the funds that we are entitled to based on the funding that HUD has allotted, but we are due the receipt of those funds. And so you have a timing variance showing a shortfall in HAP. The administrative surplus was a result of higher fee income and lower administrative expenses, mainly due to staff's turnover. The higher administrative fee income was primarily the result of increased proration rate of 97.38% compared to the budgeted rate of 91%, and to new programs that were authorized in the first half of the year. Moving on to page 15 of the packet. This packet is a point in time capital review comparing the total expenditures of capital to the full fiscal year capital budget. There are a few properties with nominal unplanned capital expenditures that have sufficient reserves to cover. And there's a handful of properties that had unanticipated larger expenditures, all of which will be funded by reserves at the property. This concludes the presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
On this last chart, you're talking about the general fund and opportunity housing.
I'm sorry, which chart are we referring to?
The last one, just the one you just
On
talked
the
about.
capital? Yes.
Yeah, the capital ones. I mean, there are not a lot of properties with a major variance against what we planned for in the budget,
Correct.
which is good. What do we anticipate going forward for the remaining quarters in terms of requirements for capital expenditures?
I'll defer to property management, who is at the table.
Thank you. For the record, Ali Ozier, VP of Property Management. Moving forward for the rest of the fiscal year, we do expect to expend most of the funding that is still remaining. Some of the capital expenses, during the winter, it's just difficult to get the work done. Some of that is outdoors. So come spring, we do anticipate completing most of the projects that we budgeted for in the fiscal year. And we do expect the budgets to be used, where you see some positive variances, we do expect those projects to get done prior to the year actually ending.
We expect to be able to do that within the budget, correct?
Yes, that is the.
Yeah, I think that's the real question, right? Because these are annual numbers, and the variance is also based on the annual, even though we're mid-year. So it's kind of a timing issue of when the money actually gets spent. And I guess, does it feel like we're on target or?
Yeah, we definitely feel comfortable that the budgets that we have for capital, we're going to be on target and we're going to be able to address most of the items that we budgeted for prior to the year ending.
I'll just chime in. Obviously, there are occasions where there's unexpected expenses. A boiler goes out, et cetera. And at those times, we present those to the commission. We, of course, evaluate the current reserves for that property. I'll also just share that the HUD has recently started to go out and do more inspections than they had in a couple of years. And so as those inspections take place, there are an increase in work orders and expenditures. And when that happens, that's also reflected. So we have both HUD and county inspections, sometimes back to back, that result in increased expenses. And I'll just add, if ever there's a circumstance that triggers anything from our HFA requirements, that also may result in yet another round of inspections. And so we're working to see, and we've started actually conversations with the county to inquire about the ability to use one inspection, the federal inspection, as the parameters for the county inspections, especially when they trigger 100% of the property. Cider Mill is a fantastic example of a property that has had 3 100% inspections within the last few months. And so those expenses are high, and ultimately we're creating corrective action plan after corrective action plan in trying to quickly address them. So
Are they finding different issues?
it could be different issues. I will say that, for example, if a tenant takes down their smoke detector, that's a violation. And we are also now having to take different steps with regards to passing along those expenditures to that individual tenant if it's a requirement to maintain that in their home. So there's different approaches. We've talked to HUD about this before. When they do a 100% inspection of a property that has 900 units, they send out different inspectors. One day you might drive and there's no mattress outside of the trash can. The next morning, by the time you get there, it looks different than it did the day before. And so it's really just a matter of how do we keep the property at the same level in a static moment in time, accomplish the goals, get through the corrective action plan. And with properties such as Cider Mill, we're working our way through, but where it has been identified as a troubled property by the county, that triggers additional inspections, but also limits our ability to increase rent that could help offset the expenses. So we're working with the county on that as well.
In my experience, I have found that there's a correlation sometimes between those persons who are not paying rent, but who are in fact imposing a lot of the costs we pay for capital improvements. I don't know what your experience has been, but I know I've seen that in the past, where the ones who pay you less are the ones who are costing you the most money to operate their units. you
That
gotta
is
adjust
true,
that.
especially at Cider Mill. We do have most of the tenants who are in lease enforcement for either non-payment of rent or other lease violations. They usually do tend to be the ones who do the most amount of damage, unfortunately. Yeah, that's essentially what we're experiencing at Cider Mill and most other properties. The ones who don't pay are typically the ones who also create the most burden on the operating expenses side.
So you might want to charge them, if they're not paying already for the basic. Also, occupancy, they're not gonna pay for additional improvements.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, any questions, other questions? Can I get a motion to refer this matter to the full commission?
So moved.
Seconded, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay, so ordered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Always good to see you, Terry.
Thank you.
The next item is our favorite subject. Uncollectible tenant accounts receivable.
Yes. And commissioners, this goes hand in hand as we work our way through lease enforcement and ultimately determine that there are certain collections that we won't receive based on our policy. We do come to the commission to write those amounts off. I will just also indicate that we are, again, pursuing collections where we have not received the revenue and or funding from these different tenants, but I will turn it over to our finance team, and I believe Sewa Abijan is going to do this presentation.
Thank you, President Andrews. Good morning, commissioners, staff, and member of the public. For the record, my name is Sewavi Prince Abujan, accounting manager with HOC Finance Division. We are seeking your support for the write-off of the collectible tenants account receivable for the second quarter of fiscal year 2025. As you may know, HOC current policy is to provide for allowance for any tenant account receivables balance in excess of 90 days. And in addition to that, HOC periodically proposes the write-off of uncollected former resident balances. So the proposed write-off of former tenant account receivable balances for the second quarter of fiscal year 2025 is $303,899,000. As with the last few quarters, lease enforcement was by far the largest driver in write-off, accounting for 97%. On a comparative basis, FY25 Q2 write-off of $303K is a decrease when compared to FY25 Q1 write-off of $486K. When we compare that number to FY24 Q4 balance of $378K, this is still a decrease when compare Q2 of FY25 compared to FY24 Q4. So the proposed write-off of $303K is a decrease of 38% when we compare Q2 write-off to the Q1 write-off. So we can say that our lease enforcement efforts are paying dividends with a decrease in delinquent accounts, resulting in decrease in FY25 Q2 write-off. The next anticipated write-off of former tenants on collectible accounts receivable balance will be for the third quarter of FY25, which will cover the period of January 1st through March 31st, 2025. We are seeking your support to recommend to the Commission the write-off of uncollectible tenant account receivable for the second quarter of fiscal year 2025. This will conclude our presentation.
You have any questions? You know, it's always interesting when you use metrics that say that it's better than it was. You know, but even though
Could have been worse.
yeah, the pain is still, but it is a good sign it's moving in the right direction. Can I get a motion to accept the report and to refer this matter to the full commission for action?
So moved.
Seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. So ordered. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
we're looking forward to you coming in and having no report.
All right, thanks.
The next item on the agenda, and the final item on the Budget and Finance Committee agenda is for the renewal of our primary audit contract. I'll turn to our president.
Thank you, commissioners. As you're aware, we have had the services of Clifton Larson Allen for quite some time. The last contract that the commission approved included multiple years of renewals. They have provided us with sound accounting and have been a good partner to us in terms of ensuring our agency is meeting our fiduciary and financial obligations. We are seeking approval for renewal, and I will turn it over to our CFO to provide further details.
Thank you, President Andrews. Commissioners, again, for the record, Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. The purpose of this final item is to request BF&A support to renew the primary audit contract with Clifton Larson Allen, CLA, for an additional year. HOC, in its sole discretion, has 3 one-year renewals available on this contract. Staff requests authority to utilize the second of these available one-year options, extending the contract through July 1, 2026. CLA is a leader in the auditing community. CLA has an unsurpassed depth of experience serving housing finance agencies and authorities similar to HOC. They perform the largest number of single audits in the United States. They have a large bench with more than 9,500 employees, 120 locations, and more than 400 governmental professionals nationwide. They serve more than 4,200 governmental entities across the country, including some of the largest housing authorities with housing finance agencies in the country and housing. CLA has served as HOC's primary auditor since fiscal year 2005. The current principal for the engagement has been the lead principal for the last 9 years. Under the current contract, CLA performs the agency's annual audit, including the single audit and bond indenture audits. Their depth of audit knowledge, as well as the level of commitment, availability, and access is exceptional. CLA has demonstrated an ability to work well with all divisions and staff throughout the agency. Staff believes that CLA offers the agency a solid combination of government and real estate expertise and will continue to provide high quality and efficient auditing services. CLA has met all required auditing and reporting deadlines and provided technical assistance with no additional costs. CLA has also partnered with the agency, delivered increased transparency, providing draft financial documents and single audit materials far in advance of the due dates to allow for the commission to review and provide feedback. The current contract provides a FY25 audit fee of $253,000. In addition to this base price, staff is requesting, as consistent with last year, a 20% contingency to be built into the contract to account for potential additional services rendered. It is not expected that those additional costs will be needed. I will note that in FY23, due to additional testing for component units, as well as additional testing required for the single audit, there was a significant amount of work that was needed. Last year's audit was not the case, but just to be on the safe side, we are still requesting that 20% contingency. And with that, staff requests BF&A support to renew the primary audit contract with CLA for 1 additional year, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Is this the last 1-year extension we can authorize?
There is 1 more allowed in this. I would expect that the agency will go through a comprehensive review and RFP shortly, as it's going to be required. They generally take about a year.
Yeah, very good. I mean, from my vantage point, I think they have been an excellent audit firm, and they certainly have integrated their work ahead of time in most cases with the commission, and always been available for questions. And I think I found them to do really good work. I mean, I think that's reflected in the fact that they have been our auditor for a while. So with that, can I get a motion to recommend forward to the full commission the extension of the audit contract to CLA LLP for 1 more year?
So moved.
I second it. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. So ordered.
Thank you.
There is no other matter coming for the Budget and Finance Committee. I would note that this will probably be the last time you see only myself and Jeff as members of this committee. Now that we have some new commissioners, we're going to be restructuring the membership of our committee. So maybe new faces will bring new ideas and hopefully not too many new questions.
I'm sure they'll bring good questions.
Yes, but again, I want to thank Jeff for having served with me as part of the commission as we've gone through this transition period. So we're looking forward to the future. So thank you very much. So this meeting's adjourned as of 10:56 a.m.
Thank you.